You know, the thing I've noticed about people who talk about President Obama and how he's done on his first term, there's a lot of hyperbole that goes around. Everybody either says he's the greatest president ever, like he's done so much, probably because he's the first African American president, the first president to openly support gay marriage, the president who finally passed some sort of law about health care. He's done a lot of things, so a lot of people probably view him positively for that reason. Either that or they call him the worst president ever because he's a Nazi, fascist, socialist, communist, everything. And he's a Muslim. He really supports the Middle East and he wants to wipe Israel off the map. And he wants to destroy small business and do everything wrong. Everybody either says he's the greatest or the worst president ever in history, pretty much. And I don't view it as either of those things. I pretty much view him as, I don't know, I don't really have a particularly positive or negative view of him. I just don't view him as very awe-striking. I don't view him as very influential in the world. I definitely think that he has good intentions because when I see him talk, it doesn't feel like a politician trying to talk game to me. It feels like someone who genuinely wants to make a difference. But the thing is, I don't feel like he does that very often. Maybe it's because he's timid or afraid to face people who oppose his desires. Maybe it's because he has low confidence in that he'll be able to achieve it. Maybe he's low aiming because he doesn't feel like what he wants to do is going to get through in the first place anyway. I don't know what it is, but it feels like he is just very naive about the way that politics works. It's just, that's the sort of the way that it seems like it happened. He was very hopeful. That was his motto in '08, like hope and change. That's what he wanted. But the thing about hope and change is I find that they tend to be very naive because they're very difficult to achieve. You know, a lot of people try and say he's either the greatest or the worst, but if I try and think of a president to compare him to, granted, I'm not an expert on history, I don't know about every president, but from my limited perspective, I'd probably compare him to Herbert Hoover, for those of you who know who he is. He generally has a very, very negative outlook. He's viewed as very poor, and a lot of people put him as one of the lowest presidents of all time. And that's just sort of the social norm. However, when a lot of historians evaluate him, they tend to not say that he's so horrible. They just, I don't know, they're kind of lukewarm about him. Just a bit of note about him. He was the person who was residing in office when the Great Depression happened, when the stock market crashed. Tons of people lost their life fortune. Several people committed suicide because they saw no fortune in their lives. Several people just couldn't find jobs and they couldn't face their families, so they ran away and became hobos. And they developed these shabby little village-type things where they could barely live called Hoovervilles in honor of the great Herbert Hoover. The funny thing about these Hoovervilles is they would just be built on a funny land, and you would build these haphazard little shacks to live in. But technically that wasn't free, because technically someone owned the land, and they would say, you have to pay us rent. You have to pay us your 10 cents of rent. And if you don't do that, they evicted you. And how did they evict you? They went in your little shack. They took out the 2 or 3 things you own. They maybe took out your cot, if you have a cot or anything to sleep on. They take it, they put it in the street, and that's your eviction, because they don't own anything. There's nothing to evict. Things were so bad. But it's not necessarily like he did all these things. The thing you have to realize about Hoover is he was president during a very, very different time. There were like no corporate regulations. There were no policies like Social Security or Medicare and Medicaid that were meant to help people in case they get in a dire crisis. And basically, it was a set-up system where everything was going to fail. The economy was wrong. Consumers in the market were not doing their share. People who were leading these corporations were knowingly doing things that would make it look like their profits are up, even though they're not. We were totally invested in the stock market, which we were pretending that there was more money than there was, so people were becoming rich, even though there was no money and no production to back up that money. There were so many problems in the world, and it happened while Hoover was president. Now, the thing about Hoover is he wasn't like necessarily enforcing things. The thing about him is it stemmed from his religious belief. I believe he was a Quaker. Basically, he was of the opinion that by the way that God designed humanity, if you go to someone and wholeheartedly ask them, you're doing something wrong and you're really hurting people, can you please come and help us? Can you please come, stop doing these things because they're harmful, and please help your fellow man? He believed that if you do that, people will genuinely change their minds, their hearts will turn, and they will do the best. And that's what he was built upon in terms of his policy. He genuinely fought to help people. by doing this and by trying to convince people, but nobody was buying it. These corporate leaders, these people who were pretending they had more wealth than they did, nobody listened to him, because why should they? And, you know, obviously politics all around was also corrupt. Nobody was really representing anything. There were so many problems, and he felt like he could just solve it by having a positive attitude, and it didn't work. Nobody listened to him, and he didn't get anything out of it. As such, so many people remember him as being bad, and everybody blamed him. Like, if you're in a shack because you have no job, that's a Hooverville. You're in the Hooverville. Blame Herbert Hoover, even though it wasn't really about him. It was because everything was wrong in society. Society was doing things that would destroy themselves. They were doing things that were unsustainable. They weren't producing real products. It was everyone's fault. Nobody was really paying attention, and nobody was doing things that were going to solve the problem. And that's why when I hear of the story and I think about what's happened with Obama's first term, that's why I think of Herbert Hoover. Hoover wasn't perfect. He did some stupid things, but he wasn't out to destroy anyone. Things just fell apart under him. And Obama inherited a really bad situation. He came after Bush, who I think will probably be remembered as one of the worst presidents of all time. But, you know, he didn't necessarily do anything super good or super bad. It's just that there were so many problems. Corrupt politicians, corporate leaders, the voters aren't really paying attention to more local issues and how they can really make a difference. People buying things on, say, credit cards that they can't really afford and driving themselves into debt. There are so many problems in the world. And right now, what's going on, it seems like everybody blames Obama. And I understand that the president does have a fair amount of power. Everything is involved. The president is just one cog in the machine, and pretty much every cog is not functioning properly. So for everything to fall apart, it's just kind of inevitable. We have to be able to look at the big picture and see what's really going on and what the real problems in humanity are if we're going to have any hope of fixing them, because that's what the problem is. It's not just one person doing things or not doing things. It's the system that's not working. We have a system in this country and in this world, really, that's not working. And that's why I'm so pessimistic about this presidential election. And just about politics in the nearsighted future. I don't think that people are going to analyze real problems that we face. I think that people are just going to hope that by doing one little thing or one other little thing, they're going to naively expect that things are going to become better. And that's not the way the world works. You have to make sure that everything's working. All I can say is I hope that things work out. The one big difference, though, between Hoover and Obama is Hoover only lasted one term, and he was replaced by FDR, who made a ton of new policies and fought to change the hearts and minds of the country and fix everything. But since third parties aren't going to win at all, if Obama loses, then Romney is going to become president. And I don't feel like he's going to do anything to fix it. I don't feel like he's going to be that dramatic leader like FDR was. So it leaves us in this situation. Are things just going to keep getting worse and worse until the country falls apart, or are things going to get better at some point? And if they get better at some point, how is that going to happen? Because I don't see how it can. I'm still young, and I'm still learning more about the world and learning how things work, how the economy works, how people's minds work, how politics work, how everything works. But the more I learn, the more I'm just so upset that people don't know how to look at the big picture. And the more afraid I get for my future and the future of my children or grandchildren or whatever, because I don't feel like anything's going to happen. I don't feel like progress is happening. I guess all I ask is, if you're watching this and you really want to make a difference in the future, please just try and analyze everything in your life and everything in the world around you. Try and make a difference in the lives of others. Try and do something, anything, because this is a giant mess that everybody has to work in fixing. I don't know how yet, but it's something. It's a huge problem, and someone better come up with an answer and help us, because I don't see what's going to happen right now. I just see things getting worse and worse until we all fall apart.